Sound in a movie, we reckon, is 50%.
When the correct sound atmosphere is added, it really enhances the reality of that set.
Action! What is the sound of the film? What sort of noise are we going to make which is going to sit and glue itself to what's on the screen?
When we think of a James Bond film, we imagine a cocktail of explosions, car chases, exotic locations, beautiful women, exhilarating action, and amazing gadgets. And the new Bond film, Casino Royale, has all these and more. But it's not just what we see on screen that makes a film successful and exciting. A huge part of the film-going experience is also what we hear, the soundtrack. A film soundtrack consists of many elements: dialogue, music, the sound effects of on-screen action, and even the sound of things that are happening off-screen. A new Bond film and a new James Bond, Daniel Craig, present an opportunity to create a brand new sound for 007, one which will move Bond's adventures in an exciting new direction. Creating the soundscape for Casino Royale is the responsibility of Chris Monroe, the production sound mixer, whose team records the actors' dialogue and on-set sound whilst the film is being shot. Eddie Joseph, the supervising sound editor, who enhances, recreates and mixes the soundtrack for the film with his team after filming is finished. And composer David Arnold, who composes and records all the music for the film. Their task is to create a unified world of sound that will enhance and complement the images we see on screen.
I certainly feel that a good soundtrack is one that you're not necessarily that aware of. It should be seamless.
Sound on a film is it's a tricky beast because you have music and you have practical sound effects. So if I know that there is a scene where there is a helicopter flying towards me firing missiles, you're not really going to be hearing much music at that point, you know.
A mistake that's often made by sound editors is to overlay too many things. So what you get in the end is just a mess. A loud mess, but no detail. What we've gone for is detail throughout.
3, 2, 1, action!
The brief from the director and the editor was that this one should be different. This is the first film in the 007. It's when he becomes 007. So the challenge is, do we go from the standards that have been set before, or do we try to redesign the genre?
Make it natural and action!
We've gone for a lot more reality on this. We still have the cars, we still have the vehicles, we still have the chases, but we've tried to make the punches more real. If a guy hits his hand against the wall, it's going to really hurt like his hand has hit that wall. We also know to make the audience jump sometimes that we have to be very, very clever with sound. We have to utilise all our elements to create a sound that will make the audience leap out of their seats or scream with joy or fear or whatever.
At the beginning of Casino Royale, a nail-biting chase sequence takes place on a construction site in Madagascar. So how did the sound team go about developing a tense, exciting atmosphere?
When you see the film, you will jump when you hear the bulldozer because it's not on screen.
The construction site is a very exciting chase sequence. We would have recorded lots of sound effects there of the different vehicles, the different cranes. There'll be a whole library of stuff which takes place there. We will have recorded the actors' breaths and so on as they're chasing.
And breathing down. And 3, 2, 1, action.
Imagine if you don't hear people breathing, it just sounds unnatural. There isn't only sound when people are talking. And in that construction site sequence, although there's not a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of sound.
As well as the sounds we hear, which reflect the images we see on screen, music is also a key element for creating a sense of both place and emotion.
There's a kind of tradition in Bond films that when you go to a new location, you kind of declare it with, with the music of where you are. So, for instance, in Die Another Day, we were in Cuba for a bit, so there was Cuban music. In Tomorrow Never Dies, we were in China, so there was like Chinese music. So it's not a great surprise to find that when we're in Africa, we go very African. Halfway through the movie, there's an enormous fight on a stairwell. There's a character in the stairwell fight who appears at the beginning of the movie. So we thought we'd bring back the sound of the character from the beginning. So this stairwell fight is now kind of driven by this African percussion again. And those things kind of help to tie all, connect everything together. You're reminded that this is the guy from earlier, and you're also reminded of all the things that James Bond had to go to get to where he is now. So it kind of, somehow it informs you about the story as well, about the arc of the story.
Action!
The stairwell sequence is a good example of the fresh challenges presented to the sound department by a new Bond film with a new actor in the lead role. The team worked together to create a soundscape which blends the sounds recorded on set with those added later during post-production.
The stairwell sequence is a classic fight sequence. It starts at the top of the stairs and ends on the bottom. And it's how you get from one to the other. That's what it's all about.
Obviously, they aren't actually hitting each other. They aren't actually falling several stories below. So they're areas that will be enhanced in sound post-production.
Chris actually recorded a very usable track on that.
3, 2, 1, action!
We've used pretty well the dialogue grunts and so on of the actors. But to make it exciting, we have to make sure that the sword is got a good swing to it when it sort of slices through the air. And eventually it clatters to the ground. We've got to make sure the audience is very much aware that the sword has actually gone, so that it's not part of the fight anymore.
It's a very brutal fight. And if you'd have used the Bond theme, there would have been no danger involved. You'd have been absolutely no doubt as to what the outcome would have been.
Music can enhance scenes like this and make them feel more dramatic and exciting. Although this is the 21st Bond film, Casino Royale actually introduces us to the character for the first time. This new beginning gave David Arnold a different set of musical challenges.
I think music has a unique position in 007. Monty Norman's theme, which is just synonymous with the character. At some point you're going to want to hear something of that character in the music, which kind of reminds us where we are, that we're making a James Bond movie and that we're not making an action-adventure movie with someone called James Bond in it. And I think there's a difference between those two things. When you're in a situation where James Bond is in real peril or in real danger, the idea that somehow you have this safety net, which I think it is to a certain extent, it is a bit of a safety net, the theme, but not being able to use that this time has made the rest of the music had to be more dramatic as a result. We're talking about a character that hasn't got the wherewithal to get himself out of every situation quite yet in the way that we were perhaps like him or expect him to. So we don't really hear the theme until the end of the movie, but we allude to it, you know. As he sort of does stuff, he kind of earns his stripes. He gets a little bit of it, you know. It's like a reward thing for the audience almost.
Creating the soundtrack for a film requires careful planning, which begins long before the film is shot.
My first role on a film is taking the script and breaking it down. I'll look at all the sound elements in the script that are noted. I'll look at the sound elements which maybe aren't noted, which I feel we will need to get. I'll try to build up a list of what sound effects will need to be acquired. I'll look at areas where I'll need to have perhaps sound playback, where I need to play music for someone to dance to, somebody to sing to. And I'll all the time be thinking about how that has to be kept separate from the dialogue, how that has to be kept separate for post-production. Interestingly, when I'm actually recording, I try very hard not to actually look at the script, because I want to make sure that I'm understanding what the actors are saying, that I'm believing what the actors are saying.
Keep your head about you. I think you have him.
Ed, excuse me.
You're not buying in?
No.
While Chris Monroe is recording the sound on set, Eddie Joseph and his post-production team work in a very different way to create the final soundtrack in the studio.
The difference between the way we would record and the way Chris would record is that we are looking at it from a totally different standpoint. And he'll be recording what's being recorded by camera at the time. We, of course, can't do that. We are going from the editor's cut. So it may be that 2, 3, 4, 10 cameras are being used on major sequences, big war sequences, for example. Cameras will be everywhere, but you can't record everything. So when we see the edit, then we make our decision about what we need to record. We take Chris's production dialogue, we have replacement dialogue, crowd, Foley, sound effects, atmospheres. We shoot them, play with them, manipulate them, and finally put them all together in the final mix.
Eddie's team had to create most of the sounds for the spectacular construction site sequence, for example.
These two guys are running on girders and leaping across from crane to crane. Every footstep has been recorded specifically for that. I don't know how the camera got up there most of the time, but there wouldn't be a sound recordist within 100 yards of that. In fact, a lot of it, there was no sound running. There's going to be music playing throughout this, a percussive score. Our sounds will have to be very clean to cut through. Also bear in mind too that the visual effects will not be done until well after the principal photography is done. There may be things there, elements there that will make an enormous amount of difference. You can create a crash without actually vehicles hitting each other, but you can't record it at the time.
So far, we've seen how sound contributes to the action sequences. But Casino Royale also contains moments of drama which happen in more intimate locations, such as the private room where the crucial game of poker is played by Bond and the villain, Le Chiffre.
You changed your shirt, Mr. Bond. I hope our little game isn't causing you to perspire.
The Salon Privé is a difficult scene in that it is a card game and it's to take you towards the climax of the film and to create a tension between people. But there's very little vocalization within it. So we would use all Chris's production dialogue, but most people are sitting around a table.
I'm all in.
There are a lot of different sound challenges. One, of course, is that there's a lot of dialogue that explains the plot of the film. So we have to really be sure that we can understand the dealer when he's making certain calls, because people might not understand poker.
Well, it's 14,500,000, and it's up to you, Monsieur Bond.
There'll also be things that are being said in the background.
Bond will have to go all in to call his bluff.
Which have got to be said quite quietly, because we wouldn't want everybody to hear them.
Gentlemen,
but we as an audience have got to be able to hear them when we're in close-up.
Full house.
We would get everybody else to mime their sound whilst we're shooting that little bit of dialogue. And so all of the background people would not be making any noise with any of their props.
There are people in this room who would not be recorded because Chris would only be recording the game and the people playing.
I'm, in some ways, recording the original sound, but creating an unnatural situation by asking people to mime, by asking people not to make noise with their props, with their chips, with their cups, with their glasses.
Send the barman over, please.
And Eddie is coming in later on and adding that stuff back in to make it real.
Dry martini.
Oui, monsieur.
Wait. 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, half a measure of quinoa lily, shake it over ice, and then add a thin slice of lemon peel.
Yes, sir.
In order for the audience to believe that there are other people in the room and they're reacting to it, we have to then record separately a few actors. We'll bring in voice actors who will come in. We'll show them the scene and we will direct them into producing something hopefully not too silly in reacting to the game. Chris will naturally have tried to record every bit of dialogue so we can use it.
When are you supposed to enter so the others could see you?
And in order to do that, he might have put a tape on the bottom of actors' shoes with the waiters, waitresses or whatever, so you don't hear the clip-clop there, which would cut into the dialogue. So when you see people walking around and people with trays, they're making sure the trays don't clank. We then, of course, make sure they do clank. So we'll put the glasses on them and we'll physically make a little sound for them.
Specific sound effects are created in post-production by the Foley team. Their task is to recreate the on-screen sounds that we take for granted.
The chief has a particular thing he does with the chips. He will do a little nervous device. That sound we have to get absolutely right so that even though we don't see him doing it, when we hear that sound, we know that there may be an element of bluff going on in the play. Chris, he would have recorded it for the close-ups, and it may be that we would use what he's recorded, but if we record it again using Foley, we can get the same chips, but we can record that in an environment which is absolutely clean, and therefore we have the control over it.
Race.
You're talking about the salon privé, it's exactly what it is. It's a private room, and by the time we're getting into the games, we don't want to hear much as outside of it. We want to keep people in, concentrating on the game themselves.
Bet 200,000. Monsieur, you have been called. Sit down, please.
I think the idea of the music within the games of cards is not about the game itself, obviously. It's about what is happening to the personalities who are playing this game. It's about what is at stake. Music has to kind of evoke the truth that is behind what it is that you're seeing. And sometimes music speaks to you about what you're seeing, and sometimes it speaks to you about something that you're not seeing, because ultimately there's a lot of people sitting around a table and looking at each other, and you know, what else is telling you what's going on aside from the music? Look and every emotion, and it became just too obvious that you were being manipulated through the scene. So we took a much more kind of austere and kind of colder approach, where we had a kind of blanket somehow, you know, it was a very sort of thin, gentle, it was semi-orchestral, semi-electronic, atmospheric umbrella of tension over the entire scene. You didn't want to kind of underline things too heavily, so it was more about trying to create the tension. You pick your moments and you know, you try and do something which kind of dissolves into the atmosphere of the place.
From action and compelling drama to tension and